Welcome to my channel, detailing events throughout the decades. 1975. Moorgate Tube Crash. London's tube network first opened in 1863. The tube at the time was considered the safest methods of transport in Britain. Moorgate is an interchange between the underground network and the outside train services. Deep underground are the platforms of Moorgate Station, and this is used for the Northern City Line service. At the end of Platform 9, there was a red warning light on a post, situated in front of a 61 cm high sand drag, placed there to stop overrunning trains. The speed limit was 40 miles per hour on the line and 15 miles per hour on entry to Moorgate Station. All equipment on the trains were examined on a 6-week basis, but weekly checks were made on the stock brakes, doors and compressors. On February 28, 1975, the first shift of the day was driven by Leslie Newson, aged 56. Leslie had worked for London Transport since 1969, and had been driving on the Northern Line for 3 months. Leslie was known by the staff as being a very careful and conscientious driver. With him on that day in his works bag, he had a bottle of milk, sugar, his rule book and a notebook. He also had with him £270 which he planned to spend on a second-hand car for his daughter after his shift had ended. Staff reported that Leslie's behaviour was normal that day. The first trip of the day was between Drayton Park and Moorgate Station, and started at 6:40 am. The final journey from Drayton Park was at 8:38 am. The train was carrying around 300 passengers, most of them commuters in the peak of rush hour. As the exit from Platform 9 was next to the overrun tunnel, passengers often made their way into the first 2 carriages, which at the time were full. The train departed Old Street on its 56-second journey. On board with Leslie was Robert Harris, an 18-year-old guard. At the time, Harris was getting bored, so left his position at the guard's control panel, which contained the controls for the emergency brake, and wandered to the back of the train looking for a newspaper. On arrival at Moorgate Station at 8:46 am, the train, which had 3 connect carriages, did not slow down. No brakes were applied, and it passed through the station at around 30 to 40 miles per hour. The signalman at the time claimed that the train seemed to accelerate as it passed the platform. Passengers standing on the platform claimed they saw Leslie Newson sitting upright and facing forward, with his hands on the controls as the train sped past. No brakes were applied, and the dead man's handle was still depressed when the train entered the overrun tunnel, throwing up sand from the drag. The driver's cab made impact with the hydraulic buffer and the carriage was separated from its bogie. The coachwork was forced into the end wall and roof. The first 15 seats of the carriage were crushed to 2 foot. The second carriage was forced under the rear of the first carriage and buckled at 3 points, causing it to bend into a V shape. It was forced into the tunnel roof. The third carriage was damaged at both ends. 42 passengers and Leslie Newson died that morning. 74 passengers were treated in hospital for their injuries. The first call to emergency services was at 8:48 am. London ambulance services arrived at 8:54 am, followed by London Fire Brigade at 8:57 am. A team of 2 doctors and 2 nurses also attended the scene. The last casualty of Carriage 3 was removed by 9 am. By 9:30 am, Moorgate and many surrounding roads had been cordoned off for the emergency vehicles to attend the scene. Fire crews had to carry their heavy equipment 70 feet underground to the scene of the crash. Firemen had to cut holes in parts of the structure to move in a medical team from the London hospital, so they could set up a makeshift operating theatre on the platform near the triage team. Everything on scene was covered in a thick layer of residue from soot and dirt in the air. Cutting gear and lamps were used by the fire crews, which raised the heat in the tunnel to over 49 degrees. Oxygen levels began to drop as train services were stopped and no fresh air was reaching the platforms. By 12 noon, 5 casualties were left still to be rescued. By 3:15 p.m., there were 2 casualties left to be removed. These were Margaret Lyles and Jeff Benton. They had both been in the front section of the first carriage and were pinned under the wreckage. Emergency crews worked for hours to free them both, and it was clear that Margaret needed to be removed first, which could only be done by amputating her left foot. She was released at 8:55 p.m. Jeff Benton was finally rescued at 10 p.m. The emergency crews called for silence, so they could listen for more survivors, but it was clear that the remaining bodies were all dead. The site medical officer declared that the remaining bodies were not alive. 2 of the victims died of crush syndrome soon after being released from the wreckage. Jeff Benton also died later in hospital of crush syndrome. Work now began on clearing the wreckage and the bodies still trapped inside. The smell of decomposing bodies was starting to be noticed by the workers. Those working on the platform or in the tunnel were restricted to 20 minutes working time, followed by 40 minutes of recovery time. The last victim was removed from the front carriage on March 4. Normal train services resumed on March 10. The rescue and cleanup took the efforts of 1,324 firemen, 240 police officers, 80 ambulance crew, 16 doctors, and several nurses. The post-mortem on Leslie Newson was performed on March 4, 1975. No physical conditions, such as stroke or heart attack, were found, which may have explained the crash. No other health problems were reported in Newson. At the time of the post-mortem, it was not possible to confirm that Newson had been drinking. An analysis of Newson's kidneys by toxicologist Dr. N. Robinson showed that the blood alcohol level at the time of the post-mortem was 80 mg. Dr. N. Robinson said that there were several biological processes that produce alcohol in the body after death, and it was not possible to reach a defined conclusion. Those who worked with Newson reported that they had no reason to believe he had been drinking that morning. Newson's widow also stated that her husband rarely drank. The coroner's inquest was between 14th and April 18, 1975. 61 witnesses gave evidence. The jury returned its verdict as accidental death. On March 7, Anthony Crossland instructed an investigation to begin into the cause of the crash. During the investigation, it was established that the train's mechanics were in good working order, and no health problems were found with Leslie Newson. The investigators were perplexed as to the cause of the crash. A report was published on March 4, 1976. It stated that tests showed no equipment fault was found, and the dead man's handle had no defects. From X-rays it was clear that at the moment of the crash, Newson's hand was on the dead man's handle. No electrical faults were found. Suicide was also examined as a possibility, but considered this to be unlikely, given that Newson was planning to buy a car later that day. The report found that there was insufficient evidence that the accident was due to a deliberate act. The guard's lack of experience meant he could not have taken any action to stop the accident from happening. It was concluded that the accident was solely due to a lapse on the part of driver Leslie Newson. When Platform 9 reopened, changes had been made to assist drivers. The back wall of the tunnel was painted white and a large heavy-duty buffer preceded the sand drag. A speed limit was imposed of 10 miles per hour on entering the platforms. A memorial was held on March 19 at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. 2,000 mourners attended the service. In the southwest corner of Finsbury Square, 410 meters north of Moorgate Station, a memorial was unveiled in July 2013, listing the names of all those who had perished in the crash. This was constructed after a long campaign by relatives of the victims. On February 28, 2014, a memorial plaque was unveiled by Fiona Woolf, the Lord Mayor of London, on the side of the station building in Moor Place. It was and still remains, the worst peacetime accident on the Underground network. Forever remembering those who died on that fateful February day. May you never be forgotten. Thank you for watching and learning about events throughout history. Please subscribe to my channel to view other events throughout the decades.